So I'm going to be explaining 7.1 WSPM. This was a homework on Tuesday. I'm going to do the odd ones. So number 7, notice that we do have parentheses, but there are no exponents on the outside of the parentheses. So you don't have a power to a power. So there is no exponent to distribute in there. So you could just rewrite it without the parentheses. So you really just have the a squared out in front, the a to the third, and the a to the sixth. Now rule 1 says that if you're multiplying terms with the same base, all you have to do is add the exponents. So when you do add, the 2 plus 3 is 5 plus 6, that is 11. So your answer is a to the 11th power. That should be your answer for number 7. Doing the odd ones only, number 9. Again, there is no exponent on the outside that you have to distribute. There is no exponent that you have to distribute on the outside of the parentheses. So rule 3 doesn't apply right here. Rule 3 says that when you do have parentheses with an exponent on the outside, you have to distribute it. That's not happening right here in this case. So right here, what you should do is just recognize that there is nothing to distribute and just rewrite everything. You could rewrite it without the parentheses, y squared z, y z squared. And there is multiplication between all the terms, so you are able to rearrange it. So you will have y to the second times y to the 1, because there's really an invisible 1 right here. And then we also have the z to the 1 and the z to the second. Z to the 1's here, z to the 2nd's there. So your final answer should be y to the 3rd, z to the 3rd. That's number 9. Moving on to number 11. Once again, there's nothing to distribute from the outside in, so you don't even need the parentheses. What you really have is a squared times b to the 4th times a squared times b to the 2nd. If you rearrange it, a squared times a squared, and then b to the 4th times b to the 2nd, you'll get your final answer, a to the 4th, using rule 1, add the exponents, times b to the 6th. 4 plus 2 is 6. So your final answer there is a to the 4th, b to the 6th. Let's do the same for number 13, explaining all the odd ones on this homework. Again, there's nothing on the outside of the parentheses to distribute in, so you could just rewrite everything and rearrange it. You really have a 2 times x squared times 3 times x to the 5th. Let's put the coefficients together. The 2 and the 3, we're going to write them 2 times 3. And then let's bring down the x squared times x to the 5th. So we all know that 2 times 3 is 6. Final answer is going to have a 6. And then x to the 2nd times x to the 5th, you add the exponents, you get x to the 7th. Okay, so let's move on to number 15. And you could, again, rewrite everything without the parentheses, but after doing it a while, you might as well start arranging things, okay? So instead of just 4 and then rewriting the rest, let me put the 4 and the 3 together. 4 times 3, that's going to end up being 12. Let me put the x's together. X to the 1 and x to the 3rd. X to the 1, x to the 3rd. And also the y to the 3rd and the y to the 5th. Y to the 3rd, y to the 5th. There is all multiplication between all terms. That's why we were able to rearrange them. Final answer will be 12, x to the 4th, because 1 plus 3 is 4. Y to the 8th, because 3 plus 5 is 8. There's your answer for number 15. Number 17. Right here I am going to, same thing, rewrite. There is no exponent on the outside to distribute, so I'm just going to rewrite what I have. But let me put the coefficients together. Negative 5 times 3. And then I'm going to write the m to the 3rd and then times m to the 8th. So negative 5 times 3, that's negative 15. M to the 3rd times m to the 8th, that's really m to the 11th. So your answer is negative 15 m to the 11th power for number 17. Number 19, right here we have a power to a power. So we could say 2 times 3 is 6. So in exponential form, your answer would be 10 to the 6th power. Okay? Now, whenever you can simplify something, you should. So in other words, right here you're supposed to do 10 times 10 times 10, 6 times. It ultimately is going to be a 1 with 6 zeros. So 1 million is your answer on number 19. Number 21, right here, it's rule 3. Rule 3 says that when you have parentheses with an exponent on the outside, you distribute it to each and every term. Now, on a previous video, I explained that if you do have a negative sign inside the parentheses with an even power on the outside, your answer will be positive. Once again, this is a negative number. It's an ugly number, has a P on it, but it's a negative number. And when you square a negative number, you end up with a negative times a negative, which ends up being positive. So I already know my answer is going to be positive. And all I need to do now is actually distribute the square, put it on the 6. You'll end up with 6 squared. The 2, put it on the P. You're going to end up with P squared. So your final answer is positive 36 P squared. I will do 22 because that one's very similar to this one. I actually did it on the other video. Right here, you do have a negative on the inside. So think about this. It's a negative number to the third power. Is that going to be a positive answer or a negative answer? It's going to be negative. Thank you. So this is going to be a negative answer. So you don't even have to worry about this negative sign anymore, because you already know that a negative times a negative times a negative, it ends up being a negative. So you don't have to worry about this negative anymore. You already know that your answer is negative. All you have to do now is distribute that 3 and put it on each of those exponents and multiply those exponents. So you really have 3 to the third and y to the third. And we all know that 3 to the third, that's really 3 times 3 times 3. So your answer is negative 27, because 3 times 3 is 9 and 9 times 3 is 27. You bring down the y to the third, and there's your final answer for number 22. Let's go back to the odd ones. I said I would do all the odd ones here. Number 23, let's distribute. We're going to distribute the power of 2 and put it onto that 3 to the 1 and onto the p to the 1 and onto the r squared. So when you distribute to each of those, you're going to end up multiplying. So you end up with 3 squared p squared r to the 4th. This is rule number 3. So 3 squared, that's 9. And then you have p squared r to the 4th. And that's it. That's your answer. Now we do have some geometry down here. What we do need to remember is when we do the area of a rectangle, the area of a rectangle is base times height, or length times width. A equals length times width, or base times height, whatever you want to call it. Anyhow, they want you to express the area of this rectangle on number 25, where the length is 5 and the height, or the width, is x squared. So you need to actually multiply those together. So if you call this the length and you call this the width, and the area is equal to length times width, you're going to end up with the area being the length, which is x to the 5th, times the width, which is x squared. So the area is what? X to the 7th. Rule 1 says add the exponents. So the area is x to the 7th on number 25. Likewise, 26. In this case, you have to do this base times this height, or that length times that width. Either way, you're going to have c times d times c times d. So it's really c times d, which is really c squared d squared. So the area right here is c squared d squared. And 27, probably not going to give this to you on a test, but we do know that the area of a triangle, we should know that the area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. Okay? So you really have 1/2 times the base, and the base is 9 p to the third, times the height, which is 4p. So we're going to multiply all this through, and we're going to end up, let's rearrange everything. We're going to have 1/2 times 9 times 4 times p to the third times p. So multiplication, you could say 1/2 times 9, or you could say 9 times 4 first and then multiply by half. You could go in either direction when it comes to multiplication. So you could say 9 times 4 is 36, but then multiplied by half of 36 is 18. So your final answer should be 18 p to the 4th, because right here, p to the third times p to the 1, add the exponents to get p to the 4th. Final answer is 18 p to the 4th. So that's all the odd ones and a couple of even ones explained on this first homework. Let's jump to the second homework. This is the one handed out today, Wednesday, 31st of January. I assigned numbers 1 through 15, I guess 3 through 15 odd. There is no 1. So let's start with number 3 right here. So I could rearrange everything. -5 times 3 times x squared times x to the 4th times y. Once again, I just brought down this -5, brought down this 3 over here, brought down the x squared and the x to the 4th, and the y I just put it at the end, rearranging. So my final answer is going to be -15 x to the what? 6th, y to the 1, or just y if you want. Let's jump to number 5, the next odd one. Right here, if we rearrange it, we'll have 3 times -2 times a, that a right there, times a squared, that a squared right there, and the d to the 4th, I'm just going to put it at the end, d to the 4th. So when we do this math, 3 times -2, that's -6. A times a squared, that's a to the 3rd, because there's an invisible 1, and 1 plus 2 is 3, and then you bring down the d to the 4th. So your final answer should be -6, a to the 3rd, d to the 4th. Number 7, we're going to rearrange this. And we already know, or already should know, that a negative, this is a negative number, times a negative is going to be a positive. So you already know that the answer is going to be positive. If you want to keep the negatives for a little while, you could do that. -15 times -1/3, bringing down the coefficients, putting them together. And then putting this x together with that x, x times x. And then putting down this y to the 4th with this y to the 3rd, y to the 4th times y to the 3rd. So when we do the math, -15 times a -1/3, that's really going to be a positive 15 over 3. See, it's really saying 15 divided by 3. So your final answer, the coefficient, is going to be 5, because 15 divided by 3 is 5. And then after that, we're going to do x times x, that is x squared. And then after that, we're going to do y to the 4th times y to the 3rd, that is y to the 7th, using rule 1, adding exponents. Jumping to number 9. Right here, let's rearrange everything. But before rearranging, I do have an exponent on the outside. So this one's tricky. You're going to have to take that 2 and distribute it to each and every exponent on the inside. And remember, a power to a power, you have to multiply. So there is an invisible 1 on the -18. There is an invisible 1 on the n. Not only that, guys, there's a negative sign right here. So this is really a giant, nasty negative number. So when you have a negative number squared, what do you get? Negative number squared, what do you get? Positive or negative as an answer? Positive, right? A negative number squared is positive. So I don't even have to worry about the negative sign anymore. I already know that my answer is going to be positive. But I do need to distribute the outside 2 to the power right there and multiply all those powers. So I do end up with a positive 18, but it's going to be to the 2nd power, an m to the 4th power, because the 2 times 2 is 4, and an n to the 2nd power, because 1 times 2 is 2. I hope everybody understands how to distribute that 2 to that first term. Now, on the second parenthesis, there's nothing to distribute. So I could just bring everything down, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring down the multiplication that's between the first parenthesis and the second parenthesis, and then I'm going to bring down the -1/6, bring down the times m, and then bring down the times n squared. Now I'm going to rearrange everything. The 18 squared on a calculator, that's 324. And I'm going to bring down the multiplication of -1/6. You could even put that in parentheses. So I need to take 324 times -1/6. I already know that that's going to give me a coefficient that's negative. So my final answer is going to be a negative coefficient. And 324 times -1/6 is like saying 324 divided by 6. Or on a calculator, if you actually did 324 times parenthesis 1 divided by 6, or -1 divided by 6, close parenthesis, you're going to get 54 as an answer. So if you did this work on a calculator, you will get -54, and that's the beginning part of your answer. That's the coefficient of your answer. And then you jump to the m's. You have m to the 4th and another extra m to the 1. M to the 4th times m to the 1, that's going to be m to the 5th. And then you have n squared and n squared, it's going to be n to the 4th. So that's your final answer, -54, m to the 5th, n to the 4th. Now, 11 is still rule 3. You have parentheses and you have an exponent on the outside. There is no addition or subtraction on the inside. So what rule 3 says is that you take that outside exponent and distribute it to every term on the inside. There's a 1 right there, a 1 right there, and a 1 right there. So I'm going to take that 2, put it there, multiply it, multiply it, multiply it on the exponents. So I really end up with 2 squared up on top and a 3 squared on the bottom with the p squared off to the side. Now the only other thing you could do is actually do 2 squared and 3 squared. 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, and p squared stays p squared. So your final answer is 4 over 9 p squared. So I do want to jump to number 12 because 12 is interesting. Even though I said I'd only do the odd ones, this is a good one to explain. Once again, this does apply with rule 3. There are parentheses. There's an exponent on the outside. There's no addition or subtraction on the inside. So technically you are able to distribute this 2 to each and every exponent on the inside and multiply those exponents because of power to a power, you multiply. So you'd end up with, right there, you'd end up with 1 squared. Down here, you'd end up with 4 squared. Right here, you'd end up with a to the second, and right here, you end up with d to the 6th. The power to a power, you multiply. So the final answer would be 1 squared is 1, 4 squared is 16, and then you put the a squared and the d to the 6th. That's your final answer for number 12. I think that's worth explaining. And a lot of people freak out with number 13 because it has decimals. You could rewrite that decimal as a fraction. After all, if you read it, it would read 4/10. This is in the tenths position. Tenths. So you could rewrite it as 4/10 k to the third to the third. Now remember that 4/10, you could reduce that. It'll become 2 over 5. So you really have 2/5 k to the third to the third. And of course, you could now distribute this 3 and multiply it with the inside exponents. So you'd end up with 2 to the 3 over 5 to the 3 times k to the 9th, because 3 times 3 is 9. And if you work this out, 2 to the 3 is 8, so you have 8 up on top. 5 times 5 is 25, times 5 is 125, and then the k to the 9th. There's your final answer for number 13. And last but not least, number 15, the area is length times width or base times height, whatever you want to call it. Either way, you know you're going to have to multiply 6a squared b to the 4th. You need to multiply that by 3ab to the 2nd. So you're going to have to rearrange things. 6 times 3, that's 18. A times a, this a squared times that a to the 1, that's a to the 3rd. And then b to the 4th times b to the 2nd, that is b to the 6th. You add those exponents. And that's your final answer for that problem. I hope these homeworks explained help you do better on the Quiz Friday.